There's just such an interesting timing here that we have Lawton and Cates here in Madison, Wisconsin. You got to speak right into that microphone there, Scott. Lawton and Cates, their history with collective bargaining.
Well, we thought it'd be a good time to come in and talk a little bit about that slide because one of the founders of our firm, John Lawton, is spinning in his grave this week. In fact, if you were to visit that grave, I think the snow would all be melted off. John was one of the top leaders in collective bargaining for public sector employees in this state from about 1945 on, and responsible as much as anybody for writing the collective bargaining laws over a 30 to 40 year period.
Well, I was just going to say this didn't all happen, Jim, under one fell swoop, because I hear stories that when Gaylord Nelson became governor, he passed some laws, and then there were some more laws that were passed in 1970 in the early 1970s.
Yes, well, John began working on it in the 40s. And every year he made progress. I think in the 50s, they even got a bill passed both houses of the legislature, which was then Republican but was vetoed. And in '59, he got the first bill passed
with Gaylord Nelson as governor.
Gaylord Nelson was governor, but there was a Republican Senate, and it passed the Republican Senate. Then in '62, they did some additional work on it to bring in mediation and fact-finding. And the interesting then is both houses of the legislature were Republican then. And then it was continued to have modifications throughout the years, and it was generally bipartisan support.
As a matter of law, collective bargaining rights are not necessarily ensconced in the Constitution, but basically it says that if you're in a union and you work in the public sector, that you have a seat at the table when it comes to workplace safety conditions. And Scott, you were telling me you represented the correctional officers, and I'm not using hyperbole here. Some of this stuff is life and death when it comes to their safety.
Well, it certainly is, and I spent 22 years at Lawton and Cates beginning in 1980. I just came back there now and returned. Ironically, we're trying to rebuild some of the labor and employment work there right when this is all happening. But I did a lot of work for correctional officers for many, many years, a lot of arbitrations, unfair labor practices, issues relating to safety, job safety, and things of that nature as well. A lot of that's potentially out the door now.
Jim, when you have some ground rules and you have a union to deal with versus this being done piecemeal, can it actually be beneficial to the municipality?
Oh, certainly. I think any time that you can get an entire workforce behind something, it is helpful to the municipality to know that rather than doing it issue by issue. Or individual by individual. So I think that by and large, over the years, employers have found that there have been benefits to having a union to deal with.
What's the phone number at Lawton and Cates? Have we got that?
282-6200.
All right. So, and of course, now this isn't just with Marty Beal and AFSCME Council 24. We're talking about MTI, SEIU, AFL-CIO, the United Food and Commercial Workers, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. We're talking about a variety of unions here, right?
Sure. Over the years, we've represented all of those unions and a number of others as well. It's private and public sector.
All right. So how did John Lawton get so interested from Lawton and Cates? How did he get so interested in collective bargaining law?
Well, he started out as in municipal government as a assistant district attorney, and became interested in public bargaining rights. Of course, in the 40s, the private sector bargaining rights were a hot issue, and John was always interested in helping out public employees, and individuals. And it's interesting that he was in law school with John Lawton, or John Lawton was in law school with Gaylord Nelson, and that the two of them did practice law together for some time. So they came from the same cut of cloth.
We've heard from some of our conservative friends that Franklin Roosevelt didn't like the idea of public employee unions. Now, I'm not sure if that quote's entirely in context. And now my guess is if the man were still alive, first of all, he'd be extremely old. But second of all, I'm guessing he wouldn't be for repealing them once we had them.
No, that would surprise me very, very much. And I think they're cherry picking on some of those quotes as well. And you can find other quotes by FDR that are to the contrary.
As a matter of law, what's the difference between collective bargaining rights for a private company, dealing with a private company, and dealing with a municipality?
Well, in the private sector, most of that is governed by federal law. And Fair Labor Standards Act, there is overlap, but primarily the jurisdiction in private sector unions is for federal law. So none of what's going on here this week affects that, despite the solidarity between private and public sector we're seeing out there in the streets. But the public sector law in Wisconsin is governed by Chapter 11170, which is county municipal.
That one, yeah, right.
And then 11180 is state employees, and that came in 1971.
And then there was some labor strife in the mid-1970s. And right as Marty Schreiber was taking over for Pat Lucy, there was a little bit of a skirmish and walkout. So then they passed some more laws, and we've had relative labor peace. We have not had teacher walkouts for the most part. It's been pretty quiet. Why is that, Jim?
Well, I think that just becomes the sides get used to working with each other and knowing what they can accomplish and what they can't accomplish. And I think that labor peace, I think that's probably the main thing which causes labor peace. In the early years of the labor movement, there will be more strife. But after a period of time, they kind of know what the ground rules are, and they work together.
All right. So Lawton and Cates will go to work for individuals who've been wronged by their company, right?
Sure.
On an individual basis.
Yes, as well as sex, race, hate, handicap discrimination, things of that nature as well. So you have all those forums, work for individuals, work for unions. And, of course, that's only a part of our practice. Another thing John Lawton was famous for, he was an environmental leader. He was chairman of the DNR board in the 1980s.
Would he have been for filling in wetlands for?
Not at all.
He supported John Bergstrom filling in wetlands?
My office was next to John Lawton's when I started out practicing in the early 80s. And our doors would be open, and I would hear him on the phone roaring with laughter sometimes, talking to Gaylord Nelson. Tony Earl was governor then. Buzz Basadny was another close friend of his. DNR secretary at the time. John was a leader in environmental matters, and that's another area that we practice at Lawton and Cates as well.
But it's much harder for an individual to go up against a big corporation than it is for a group of people that are collectively represented.
Oh, absolutely. And right now, for example, of course, this is in the private sector, but we represent some employees of Oscar Myers who have just won all the way to the Supreme Court in their right to
get dressed.
To get dressed, yes. Right. And an individual, could never have brought
that case.
Right.
Yeah. And that's really what this whole thing is about. And of course, we may be getting into the issue of right to work in this state as well, because they're certainly trying to do that in Indiana.
Sure.
And your job should be about to become very interesting at Lawton and Cates.
Yes, well, it's the ancient Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. But
well,
I certainly have that.
I have to pinch myself going through all this because I realize what we've gone through over the last couple of weeks is history. Mm-hmm. It is absolute history. Yeah, I saw that, Dylan. All right, what's your phone number? Have you got that again?
282-6200.
All right.
We do employment law, environmental law, but general civil litigation, plaintiff's work, family law, a lot of injury work, criminal law. We practice in quite a large variety of areas.
All right.
But we represent the individuals.
Right.
That's right.
Jim Olson, Scott Hassett, two of the most honest, ethical men I've ever met. I appreciate you coming out.
Thanks a lot, Sly.
All right. Lawton and Cates. Thanks so much for Lawton and Cates sponsoring this program.